Nice.
Yes. So you get the guest experience.
Love it.
Yeah. All right, everyone, we're going to get started with our next interview. We're going to have Hilton George as our next interview, and we'll go ahead with our first question from the press.
Okay. So we've interviewed before, and a lot has happened since last year. There has been other cons and conventions that's come into the play, and I just want to get your take on some of the let's say some of the newer cons that have come out and some of the issues that they are facing. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, there's an explosion in the community of just everything, right? So cosplay, music videos, anime, video games, and because there's that expansion, there's going to be an expansion of events and gatherings as the community grows. The challenge with this, that sometimes is recognized ahead of time, sometimes is not, is, just demand and mechanics and planning, and they can be really, really daunting. And unfortunately, I mean, on one hand, it's a compliment for someone like yourselves, for instance. They say, "Oh, what you do, you make it look so easy," right? But somebody who forms the question that way recognizes that it's not. Somebody who says what you do is easy and kind of moves on to either A, try to do what they think you do at the level you do it, without the preparation that may need to go into it, or without a knowledge of where the pitfalls and potholes and risks may fall, will struggle and oftentimes fail. And I think that's what we are seeing with some of the conventions that have not succeeded or persisted, both since COVID and during. And unfortunately, there isn't a handbook, there's no guidebook, there's no seminar, there's no convention runners conference where resources and planning and just that boot camp that you may need as someone who might be a fan, who maybe has never run an event. You might not know where the flaws are, where the challenges are. And these are the things that we need to kind of build into the rub, because we need successful conventions in order for the community to expand and to succeed. We have to have spaces where we come together and, we kind of connect with one another and we share information and we connect face to face, like physical contact. That has to happen. 15, 20 years ago, that was the mainstay of the nerd community. You go to cons, they were pretty stripped down, a little marketplace over here, one or two panels over there, but what was important was that the people and the fans came together in the same space and interacted and connected and renewed those bonds that we talk about. Now with the hyper quick and the hyper fast growth of the community, I think you're seeing, obviously from a business standpoint, a sense of opportunity. People who have certain backgrounds in certain business fields are coming into the space thinking that those will automatically translate, one-to-one, and 99.5% of the time they do not. I was blessed. I'm actually sitting at MomoCon. MomoCon is one of the conventions that, helped resource me in building BlurredCon. I had the blessing of being able to stand up in a convention, a conference for con runners, called Project Anime at the time, and stand up one calendar year before BlurredCon happened. 150 con runners from all over the world, and I said, look, I am running a convention that has not happened yet called BlurredCon. I am here to learn that which I do not know that I don't know. And then I sat down. And I spent the next 3 days just burning through notepads. People turned their chairs to me and talked to me about expectations and planning and scale and budgeting and promotion and connection and resources and everything that I thought I knew about, but I didn't. And we were able to avoid a lot of the same potholes that first, second, and even third-year cons run into because we had resources like MomoCon, like Otakon, like Anime, NYC coming later down the road. Some of the community have come together to help us make it through that rough time before we kind of got into our cruising altitude, if you will. And I don't see that infrastructure there. And I also don't know that the people who are coming in even if they're aware of it, would necessarily take advantage of it. It has to be packaged in a certain way, right? I said this to one of you just today. I said, unsolicited advice is often received as critique. So even you may see somebody who is doing something like, oh man, if you keep doing that, you're going to fall down on your face. You can't automatically walk up to somebody and be like, hey, I've got this knowledge base that you don't have, and I'm going to tell you how to do what you do. Because oftentimes we're not in a position, we don't poise ourselves or humble ourselves, or whatever terminology you want to use, to kind of prepare to take on advice from different spaces we're not familiar with. And so we have to kind of be careful. We have to gauge, how we interact and how we help and how we make ourselves available. But there's a forum for which that needs to take place. Conferences, different from conventions, conferences are places where that happens. Online communities that share resources are where that happens, where people will walk in the door and the mindset changes. I am here to learn. I might be here to teach a little. Somebody might be coming behind me that doesn't know what I know, and I can share that knowledge. But I'm here to gain knowledge, and I'm here to grow. And right now, that doesn't exist. And unfortunately, we're seeing, some conventions, con runners, and even some communities suffer as they're trying to put their events together and build on what is a great thing for something that's really, really, really necessary. Long answer to short question, but thank you.
Carnell Holly from Carnell Holly Pictures. I know we have some rapport, but I don't think I've ever heard the origin of BlurredCon.
Well, you probably heard it woven into my last description of the question. I am a lifelong nerd, and as a black nerd, I knew that my experience had certain earmarks, hallmarks, that were unique, and I felt like, I didn't see myself represented in a lot of the conventions that I was going to. You look at the guest lists, you wouldn't see a whole lot of black and brown people. You look at the subject matter being discussed in the panels and workshops might not point toward, things that are relevant or directly relating to me as a black person in the nerd space. Diversity was something we talked about, but it was a really amorphous, cloudy, fuzzy concept that we never really struck lightning with. And I said, you know what? I'm a black nerd. Why am I talking about it when I could be about it? So I kind of went in with no sense of self-preservation. Just background on me, I've got 20 years at that point of events marketing and management and promotion. But these were very different spaces. I was a low-budget puff daddy in college. I was doing after parties and, concerts, comedy shows, fashion shows. And I knew there was some baseline experience that would be applied to what I was doing here. But man, I knew I was walking in a dark room just full of, dressers waiting to stub me in my toe. So I did happen to come across and find out about Project Anime, and that definitely helped me run a con that went really, really, really smooth and very successful in its first year. But the real thing was that in the lead up to BlurredCon, we didn't know what a BlurredCon was going to look like. There were a lot of black spaces where nerds came together. There were a lot of black conventions that highlighted comic book creators and creatives in general, authors, women in comics and stuff like that, that were either by definition black spaces or by default black spaces. But the black nerd community was not necessarily front and center. That culture that comes along with being a black nerd is different than being a black comic book fan, or just being a black author, or being someone who likes, video games. There's a culture around nerddom that is unique to nerds, and within that is unique to black nerds. And I wanted to tell that story, but without there having been a template to build from, no one really knew what it would look like. Now, from a marketing perspective, a la Mad Men, there is no better marketing than to have an icon, have a concept that people project their best ideals and hopes onto, whether it's well-defined or not, right? The Coca-Cola swoosh says Coca-Cola without saying Coca-Cola. The Nike swoosh says tennis shoes without saying tennis shoes, right? There's communication in that we were able to take advantage of because people weren't really sure what the space was going to look like and who was going to be in it and what was going to happen. So we come into 2016, I've done Project Anime, and we start doing our on-the-road promotion. So we're at Otakon first. We got a table, we got banners, we got flyers, we're out there in cosplay, we're making a lot of noise, we're getting as much camera time as we can get, we're trying to spread awareness, and people are not only interested in what we're doing, but there's a conversation happening in the Black nerd community while we are out promoting the first BlurredCon. First of all, what is a blurred? Is that even a term that's necessary, right? Why do I have to be a Black nerd? Why can't I be a nerd, just a regular nerd like anyone else? These are questions that we ask as a people for decades. Do I have to be an African American? Why can't I just be an American? And we have that discourse, we have that discussion. And I ended up becoming an evangelical force for the use and the application of the term blurred. When I started off BlurredCon, there was maybe one or two other uses of the term blurred in anything. I can only think of maybe one that I can remember. Now, there might be people who can look back, well, I had this friend who was a rapper called himself blurred this, blurred that. But the word blurred was not out there front and center. So I was like, dang, not only do I have to promote the convention, I have to promote the word and the concept behind it in order to get the buy-in for people to want to come to con. And we did a whole lot of stuff. We threw the kitchen sink at it. We overworked ourselves, which as you should do for a new event and a new endeavor. We built a community, we built a team of people who had specialties and skills and things like that. It was very necessary. You can't be a 1 or 2 person operation and build a convention. You just can't. It cannot happen. And we just got lucky in that we just struck lightning over and over and over again. Now, I don't believe necessarily in God in a religious sense or anything like that, but I do believe that if you are in, if the wind is behind your back, right, if the universe is pushing you in a faithful direction and you head in that way, you'll hit less obstacles. Or you will find ways very quickly and very easily around obstacles that may lay in your path if you're doing the right thing. If there's something the universe wants you to do and you do it, then it's going to be easier than if you go in the opposite direction, right? So I feel like we had that weird blessing, we had a sense of that. And so year 1 was successful. We started off with a plan for 650 people, a judicious number. We could budget, not build too much or hype ourselves up or set a bar we could not meet. And we ended up with 1,800 people in year 1. Fast forward to year 2, we go from 1,600 people to 3,800 people, like that. Word of mouth, promotion. We promote every year like it's the first year. We don't sleep, right? Year 3 comes around, 6,800 people. Boom. Doubling, redoubling, and then of course COVID, everybody took a fall, everybody took a L. From a business standpoint though, and I think this also goes back to the previous question about, what is lacking in some of the conceptual planning around some of the more recent conventions, is a sense of where you should be as far as budget, where you should be getting your money from, how you should plan, how small you should plan, right? 600 people, I've seen people throw birthday parties with less than 600 people. That's not a huge amount of folks. But everyone I know who have been working with conventions for 25, 35, 45 years, start year 1, plan, budget, spend, space-wise, personnel-wise, volunteer-wise, 600 people. Boom. If we tried to get 2,000, we would have failed, right? If we tried to get even half of that, we probably would have failed. But we were shooting for 600 and we won. I told my business partner, Rest of Soul Haas, that after year 2, we need to plan to have enough money in the bank so that if something happens where we can't have a BlurredCon, we will have the money to survive for the next year to be able to have BlurredCon happen. And at the time I'm thinking just catastrophe, like weather on the weekend of our con, or terrorist attack, or anything that might shut the country down. I never thought of a pandemic, right? But we were able to, with that in mind, over the course of 14 months, in the lead up to COVID, stack enough money and put our expenses in a space where charges can be paused for services you're not going to need for 2 years. You think about MailChimp, DocuSign, $200 there, $300 there, $150 there, right? Have all of that on a turn of a dime, boom, pause that. So the minute everything got shut down, we were ready. And I didn't know we were more ready or less ready than anyone else, because I can only work with BlurredCon. I was like, well, we're ready for BlurredCon, that's all I know, right? So I'm comfortable that when we emerge, a year from now, 2 years from now, we're going to be able to pick up right where we left off. I quickly found out that there were a lot of conventions that were not on that footing. And then they turn right around, and then the con happens, and the year after, we're waiting for all the cons to come back because we outside. And then, well, where's such and such con at? Where's so and so con? Where are the flyers for this? They're usually here. And it's because, people were not on that footing. They did not have the financial plan. This is community. This is fandom. This is culture. But most importantly, it's business, right? I could sit here and tell you, name and verse, people and cons that don't have copyrights to their names, barely have the GoDaddy account to their domain, right? Don't have, protections around their social media or their imagery or their iconography or their logos. Don't have locked-in contracts with venues over multiple years, so you don't have to keep going back to the table every single year. Where are we going to have it this year? Where are we going to have it that year? If you want to sign a 5-year contract, you can, right? And without that business footing, anything can knock you off course. And it does, and it has, and it will, right? And we've had conversations offline. I make myself available to literally anybody who is trying to start a convention or trying to go into an event or anything that relates to the nerd space for which my resource, my knowledge can help. And I don't know more than half the people who are running this con right now. There's people in this room that got more knowledge about cons than I do. But in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. If you walk into a room and I've got 2% more knowledge than you, then it's my responsibility to make that 2% available to you. The other 5, 10, 20, 50% is somebody else's job, right? But we don't have the space for that. Where is the space where my 2% helps you? Built into the program, built into the reason we're in the room, right? So we have to be more deliberate about how we usher in and how we welcome, how we groom, how we encourage, how we build community around the conventions that we build, right? It was a fun thing 20, 30, 40 years ago to build a Spike Con. Half the cons out here right now in the anime and gaming community are Spike Cons that spun off from another convention. Yeah, a lot of the stuff precedes the internet. You can't go back 30, 45 years on Google, you'd never know. But you go to a con, like you talk to somebody who's been with that con long enough, they're like, yeah, we started off with 30 people that were fed up with ABC Con over here and said, F them, we're going over here to do our con, blah, blah, blah. And they would go and they would take what they learned from working this con and being in the administration of this convention and apply it to what they felt like was the more, acceptable or proper or more accurate take on what a con should look like. And then there's 2 cons in a community 6 months apart, who kind of have some of the same hallmarks, and people don't know, well, there's a reason for that. But this is before the internet, this is before TikTok, this is before, breaches between individuals could break up a whole community, right? Now those breaches infect relationships, personal, right, community, and business. So there's resources that get cut off to you if you break up with your partner and decide to go your own way, right? And now what happens is that you've got to circle back around and try to figure out how can I access new resources that may not be in vast abundance, right? So if we can find a way to standardize the reach and standardize the community around the conventions that we're trying to set, because they all have something unique to offer. And I think that the community is inexhaustible enough to support, especially new conventions, especially in the black space. And we need to find a way to support one another despite jealousy, despite the backbiting, despite, what that person said to somebody. I thought, we got to get around that and find out how we work together, because a con that fails anywhere hurts cons everywhere. You think a black con that fails here in Atlanta doesn't affect me in DC? All the sponsors, the guests, the agencies, the venues, they talk, right? When I go to book a guest for BlurredCon, and the agent tells me, well, we need all the guarantee money up front. We've been burned in the past. I know what you're talking about. I remember the last place your client got booked. I saw that convention collapse, and the money that you were expecting from that con go away. now you're wondering whether or not that's going to happen here, and now you want your money up, right? So there is absolutely no scenario where any convention fails and I win as a con runner. Nowhere. I don't care how I feel personally about the individuals running them or what they do or what they say or anything like that. If your con goes under, the ripple effect is going to affect us all. But a lot of people don't recognize that. And they think they can go it alone. And they think they can go by themselves and they can go their own way and they can, take that 35-year-old scenario of a spike con, or, I can do something because I'm mad at somebody over here and make something work over here. The world's too interconnected for that now. It's not 1988. You can't just be mad in a circle and nobody know about it. Everybody knows what's going on every time, everywhere. It's 2024. Cat Williams has spoken. Come on, right? So we just have to find a way to just readjust ourselves, make ourselves accessible, and understand that we share a fate. One successful BlurredCon is not enough to hold the banner for the Black nerd community if 5 BlurredCons or Black nerd conventions or Black-owned conventions go under in 2 years. And that's a very, very conservative number to a very accurate scenario of conventions. There are cons that have gone under that never surfaced over the water. You never heard of them. I did. I seen their paperwork like, oh, this is about to happen. And they bottom out before the first flyers made. That is just how crazy it can get if you don't have any resources, if you don't feel like you can share, some responsibility and open yourself up to be helped. And that's where we are. That is the platform in which we are starting. That is ground zero for everything that we're going to hopefully be able to do and do right going forward in the Black nerd community. Long answer, short question. Apologize, you go, sir.
No, you good.
One more question.
Okay. Without naming the con in question,
Oh, that's too hard.
without naming the con in question, since you said that if one Black con fails, they all fail, do you, because like MomoCon and DragonCon would never have a problem like that.
No.
Do you think it's fair to you that all Black cons are lumped into the same thing together when it comes to reaching out to guests to come be featured at these cons? Is it fair to you that that's the case?
I mean, I don't know if you think about it as fair or unfair. You have to understand that there is no track record of long-running, successful Black nerd spaces. I mean, I don't say this as a crow of my own, achievement to say that we've run the longest and we have grown the fastest. It's a shame that that's the case. When I took on the mantle of trying to create BlurredCon, I honestly thought that there were 5 or 10 other BlurredCons already out there. That I just needed to put the right Google search in, and there was going to be all these people like, oh, there's this one out here in LA, and then there's one out here in New Orleans, and there wasn't any. There was nobody out there doing what we were trying to do that we could use as a template to go forward. And so the fact that I even encountered the lack of track record of successful Black nerd events, I mean, I can't say that it's unfair that someone who is running a business, who uses stats and uses business history and spreadsheets to kind of guide the decisions they make either for their client or for their label or for their studio, to only take the evidence that's in front of them to form opinions. I don't like that that's the case, but that's business. We all do it, and it may not be specific to Black nerd conventions, but we do it with everything else, right? And, there's tactical factors that go into it. A lot of the people who are in key positions of power in the industry and studio are not Black, right? And so we rarely get a foothold. And when you find a foothold, sometimes those footholds don't last long. Everybody, and I mean this, every single person that I worked with in the year and a half before COVID and the year after COVID who were in positions of diversity, inclusion, community outreach, or anything that was like the arm of said entity to bring in and represent and tap into Black spaces and brown spaces even, every one of those people are gone. And half of the offices have been dissolved. right? So that undulating backdrop of resource that is no longer there from year to year is more of a circumstance around a failed or a perception of a failed business model than a critique on us as black people, right? Disney makes decisions about making the next Black Panther movie about money. We benefit from the fact that there are successful movies about black superheroes and successful black characters in non-black titles that are successful. We benefit from that, right? But, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that the studio has some heartfelt sincerity about, you know, black culture and black representation and Afrofuturism and all that. I don't think Kevin Feige's thinking about that stuff. So it's about the money, right? And if it's going to be about the money, which for me is where I prefer to be there. I prefer to be in a place of diversity based on the track record and the expectation of success around black business, black media, black events, than any sense of heart-warmed altruism or, you know, anything like that, because that doesn't last. You know, the headlines around George Floyd had my phone blowing up with every brand and every conceivable, you know, company trying to figure out some way to attach themselves to, you know, black spaces. They all had a task force. They all had a meeting, and they all got on the horn. 8 months later, headlines have gone out, you know, and it's moved on, the press has moved on. You don't hear from those people, right? So, to the core of your question, it isn't fair, but business isn't fair. And we need to recognize that we can do one or two things. We can react to the world as it stands, poise and position ourselves and organize ourselves in such a way that would make us, you know, able to take more advantageous, benefit from the system that we are not in order to get into it or get successful or to get big enough to change that circumstance. Or we can sit back and just hope that everybody kind of grows and evolves as a person and as a community, and that someday it'll stop raining and then we can go outside and not get wet, right? And we're not there yet. We have to act from where we are, and the reality is that from their perspective, sometimes they look and see things that aren't that business appealing, and if they don't also have a sense of, like, you know, in their heart that they want to do certain things or do community outreach or things like that, we will take it out. But everything that we do as a business, everything that we do as a community needs to run counter to that narrative. And that means anyone that, even regardless of what they're trying to do, and perceptions and rivalries and competition and all this sort of stuff, that is why it's my responsibility and everybody in a successful Blurred Space's responsibility to make sure that everyone who comes in and is seriously trying to put something together is resourced, is supported in order to be successful, because the failures do hurt us all. The successes don't always benefit us all, but the failures and the shortcomings definitely do. We'll see if that changes. I'm here to talk that, you know, there might be some infrastructure coming around and some conversations being had. Next time I'm in this chair having this conversation, might have a different tone. Right now, this is where we are, and unfortunately, you know, we're feeling the sting of the loss of some good potential conventions and some quality people with altruistic and great outlooks that, you know, could have been in a position to benefit and grow and feed the community, who are now no longer in the position to do that. And that's a loss for us all, and we should be doing everything we can in our power to prevent that from happening in the future.